My family kicked me out of my own room I was paying for to give my space to my irresponsible brother. But when I blocked them and left, they lost their house, he lost his wife, and now they're begging me to come save them again. I'm 26 years old. I work as a project manager at a tech company, and I need to tell this story because what happened a few months ago basically destroyed my entire relationship with my family. And honestly, I'm still processing whether I did the right thing or if I'm the shitty son everyone says I am. I guess I should start at the beginning, when everything was simpler and I was just the responsible son doing what I was supposed to do. For as long as I can remember, I was always the one who had his life together. You know, the one who got good grades, the one who got part-time jobs since I was 16, the one who graduated from college without student debt, because I was literally working all the time. My brother Kevin, 2 years younger than me, was completely different. Kevin was the charismatic one, the likable one, the one who always had a new business idea that was going to make him a millionaire. My parents adored him, and when I say adored, I mean literally everything Kevin did was perfect in their eyes, even when he failed spectacularly at every project he started. When I was like 22, fresh out of college, I got a decent job and started paying rent to my parents for living in their basement. It was a pretty good arrangement, actually. The basement was set up like a small apartment. It had its own bathroom, a kitchenette, enough space for my bed and my desk. I paid $400 a month plus part of the utilities, and I also helped with groceries because, well, that's how I was raised. You help the family. So I also started covering some of the household bills when my parents had tough months, like electricity, internet, those things. It was never a big deal for me. I had a good salary and they're my parents, right? That's what you're supposed to do. Kevin, meanwhile, was on his third or fourth failed business idea. First, it was a graphic design company that lasted like 6 months. Then he tried selling nutritional supplements in a scheme that definitely looked like multi-level marketing, but he swore it wasn't. Then there was something with cryptocurrency that I didn't even understand. Every time something didn't work out, Kevin would come back to my parents' house, stay a few months eating for free, and then announce his next big project. My parents always supported him, always had encouraging words like, "Kevin is an entrepreneur, he's finding his way." Or, "Not everyone can be a corporate employee like Daniel. Kevin has an entrepreneurial spirit." When Kevin was 2, I was 24, he met Amanda somewhere, I think at a bar or an app, I don't remember exactly. Amanda was pretty, I guess. But from the beginning I noticed she had pretty expensive tastes for someone who worked part-time at a clothing store. They got married super fast, like 6 months after meeting, and my parents were happy because Kevin was finally settling down. I was the best man, gave a nice speech, paid for part of the catering because Kevin was short on money, again, and everyone acted like this was the beginning of a new era for my brother. A year later, Liam was born. And then like 18 months later, Ava arrived. 2 kids in less than 3 years. And Kevin still didn't have a stable job. He had opened an electronics repair business, like computers, cell phones, tablets, and for a while it seemed like something was finally working for him. He rented a small space, got some tools, and for like a year the business was okay, not amazing, but it worked. I helped with some initial expenses, like $2,000 that I never saw back, but whatever, and my parents were so proud, always talking about Kevin's business with anyone who would listen. Things started to change like a year and a half ago. Kevin started complaining that the business wasn't generating enough money, that there was too much competition, that people preferred buying new things instead of repairing them. He started coming to my place asking to borrow money to pay the rent for the shop, to buy parts, for whatever. I gave him what I could because, he's my brother and he has 2 small kids. I wasn't going to let them starve or anything. But I started noticing that Amanda kept buying new clothes. That Kevin had an iPhone from the current year when I was still using a model from 3 years ago. Things that just didn't add up for someone who was supposedly in financial crisis. About 8 months ago, Kevin closed the business. He said it wasn't sustainable anymore, that he had lost clients, that the rent for the space was too expensive. My parents were devastated, but as always, they supported him completely. Kevin, Amanda, and the kids were living in a small apartment that cost like $900 a month, and obviously without the business they couldn't pay for it. I thought Kevin would look for a normal job, like something in retail or at a repair shop working for someone else, but no. Kevin said that would be going backwards and that he needed time to regroup and think about his next move. So one day, it was like a Tuesday afternoon. I was working from home in the basement when my parents came down. My mom had that face she makes when she's about to say something she knows I won't like, and my dad was just standing there with his arms crossed. My mom sat on my bed, which was already weird because they almost never came down to the basement, and said, "Honey, we need to talk about an important change in the house." My stomach dropped because something told me this was going to be bad. Turns out Kevin and his family were going to move into the house because they couldn't afford their apartment. And since the basement was the only space with enough privacy for a family of 4, I would have to move to the hobby room my parents had on the first floor. The hobby room, and this is important, was literally a room 2 meters by 3 meters, where my mom kept her craft stuff, boxes of Christmas decorations, and a bunch of accumulated junk over the years. It didn't have its own closet, it didn't have a private bathroom, the door didn't lock with a deadbolt, just a basic latch. And it was right next to the living room where my parents watched TV until 11 at night every day. When I say I was shocked, I was shocked. I said to my mom, "Wait, are you telling me that after 4 years of paying rent and helping with bills, you're kicking me out of my space to give my place to Kevin who hasn't paid anything?" And my dad said, with that condescending voice that pisses me off, "Daniel, your brother has a family. He has 2 small children. They need the space more than you. You're single. You don't need that much space." I tried to reason with them, told them that I also pay rent, that I also need privacy, especially because I work from home 2 days a week, that the hobby room didn't even have the basic conditions to live there. But my mom started with her usual speech about family, about how family supports each other in tough times, about how Kevin is going through a difficult time and I should be more understanding because, thank God, I'm doing well at my job. I told them I needed time to look for my own apartment, to give me at least a month or 2. My dad said no, that Kevin needed to move in 2 weeks because he had already given notice at his apartment. 2 weeks. 14 days to dismantle my entire life in the basement and cram myself into a closet-sized room. I asked them if they were at least going to lower my rent, considering the space was literally a quarter of the basement and didn't have the same amenities, and my mom said, "Well, you're still going to use the upstairs bathroom and the kitchen, so, no, the rent stays at $400. At that moment, something broke inside me, but I didn't say anything else. I just nodded and they left, probably thinking I was the obedient son as always, who was going to accept everything without protest. The next few days were a nightmare. I had to get all my stuff out of the basement, my bed, my desk, my clothes, everything, and cram it into that tiny room. The bed barely fit. I had to put the desk diagonally so it would fit with the chair, and there was basically no room to walk. I put my clothes in boxes because there was no closet, just one of those portable hanging racks I bought at Target. Kevin and Amanda arrived with the kids, and my parents were happy, helping them settle in, arranging the kids' toys, buying new things for the basement. I watched them from upstairs, feeling a mix of rage and sadness I had never experienced. The first week was terrible, but the second was worse. Liam and Ava, who were like 3 and 2 respectively, ran around the house all day. There were toys in the living room, in the hallway, in the kitchen. Amanda cooked using all the dishes and left them in the sink for someone else to wash, usually me or my mom. Kevin spent most of the day in the basement, supposedly looking for work. But I could hear him playing video games. The food I bought for myself disappeared, like I'd buy specific things for my meals for the week, and the next day they were gone. When I complained, my mom said it was selfish to keep food just for myself when there were children in the house. The noise was unbearable. My parents put the TV on really loud in the living room that was literally 2 meters from my room. The kids screamed and cried at all hours, and the walls were thin. I mean, I heard everything. I had work meetings by video and had to constantly apologize for the background noise. One day, I was on an important call with a client, and Liam started crying at the top of his lungs in the living room, and my boss later asked me if everything was okay at home. It was humiliating. About 3 weeks after Kevin moved in, I was working in my room. You couldn't even call it my room. It was a shoebox. and I needed silence to concentrate on an important report. I went down to the basement where Kevin was watching YouTube and asked him if he could turn down the volume or use headphones because I needed to work. Kevin told me. Literal words. This is my space now. If you need silence, go work at a coffee shop. I stood there, unable to believe what I had just heard. I went upstairs and told my parents what Kevin had said, thinking that at least they would see how absurd the situation was. My dad told me Kevin was right, that the basement was his space now, and I couldn't be going down there telling him what to do. That night, I didn't sleep. I stayed in that tiny room, listening to the TV through the wall, and I realized that my family was literally treating me like a second-class citizen in the house where I had been paying rent and helping financially for years. The next morning, I called a resort that offered short-term stays, like a hotel but with a kitchenette and everything, and booked 2 weeks. I told my parents I needed space to think and that I was going to stay somewhere else for a while. My mom immediately started with the drama, saying I was being melodramatic, that she didn't understand why I was so upset when all they were asking for was a little patience and understanding with my brother. I told her I had been sleeping in a room without privacy for a month, working in terrible conditions, and basically being treated like a stranger in the house where I was paying to live. She said, I had always been selfish, and that now that Kevin really needed support, I was turning my back on him. My dad added that I was ungrateful and that they had given me a roof for years, conveniently forgetting that I had been paying for that roof. I left for the resort that same day. It was expensive, like $80 a night, but I needed to get out of there before I exploded. The first few days were strange, very quiet after the constant chaos of my parents' house. I could work without interruptions. I slept well for the first time in weeks, and I started to realize how much I had been tolerating just to keep family peace. About a week after I left, my mom called me. I thought maybe she was going to apologize, or that they had reconsidered the situation. Nope. She told me I needed to keep paying my rent for the month because I still had my stuff there and technically still lived in the house. I said, how am I going to pay rent if I'm not even living there? And she said that wasn't her problem. That I had decided to leave and that didn't exempt me from the financial obligations I had to the family. She also asked me for money for groceries because Kevin still hadn't found a job, and Amanda needed formula for the baby and diapers for both kids. That's when something clicked in my brain. I told them I wasn't going to pay more rent for a place where I wasn't living, and that I wasn't going to keep subsidizing Kevin and his family's life. My mom got hysterical, screaming that I was selfish, that I was abandoning my family when they needed me most, that Kevin was doing his best. I told her that Kevin's best would be to get a job instead of waiting for me to pay for everything, and I hung up. Half an hour later, Kevin called me, furious. He told me I was a son of a bitch, that he had bad luck with his business, but that could happen to anyone. That I, with my stable job and comfortable salary, didn't understand what it was like to really struggle. I asked him why. Then 2 weeks ago, I had seen him at the mall with Amanda, buying a designer purse that easily cost $300 when they supposedly didn't have money even for formula. He was silent for a second, and then said, that was none of my business, that what he did with his money was his problem. I said, exactly, Kevin. It's your problem, and my parents shouldn't be asking me for money for your kids when you're buying unnecessary crap. He hung up. The next day, my parents sent me like 20 messages saying we needed to have a family meeting to resolve this conflict in a mature way. I agreed to go, mainly because I still had all my stuff at their house and needed to get it back. I arrived on a Saturday afternoon, and it wasn't just a meeting with my parents and Kevin. My uncles were there, 2 of my cousins, my grandmother. It was an ambush, basically. They sat me down in the living room while everyone else was standing or sitting around, and my mom started with a speech about the importance of family, about how families support each other, about how I had been blessed with a good job and should be grateful to be able to help my brother. My uncle, Carlos, my dad's brother, told me I was selfish for refusing to help my own blood. My cousin told me she would never turn her back on her brother like that. My grandmother, who's like 80 years old, told me I was disappointing her, and that my grandfather, who died years ago, would be ashamed of me. Kevin was sitting there with a victim face, letting everyone attack me while he said nothing. Amanda was holding Ava and wiping her nose, doing her best impression of a suffering mother. I let them talk for like 10 minutes without interrupting them, and when they finished, I said, "Okay, are you done? Because I have some things to say." I reminded them that I had been paying rent and helping with household bills for 4 years, that I had lent Kevin money multiple times that he never paid back, that I had been displaced to an uninhabitable room to give my space to Kevin, and that despite all that, I was still expected to keep paying as if nothing had changed. I told them that Kevin was 24 years old, not a teenager. He had 2 kids and needed to act like a responsible adult instead of waiting for me to finance his life. My dad stood up and told me I was being disrespectful, that this was his house and I had no right to talk to them like that. I said, "You're right, Dad. It's your house, and that's exactly why I'm not going to pay anymore to live here. I'm going to get my stuff and you can do whatever you want." My mom started crying, saying I was breaking up the family, that I was cruel and heartless. Kevin told me I had always been a shitty brother, envious that he had a family while I was alone. That hurt. I'm not going to lie, but I didn't care anymore. I got up, went up to the hobby room, packed what I could in 2 large suitcases, and left. I left some boxes with things that weren't that important, saying I'd come back for them. My uncle followed me to the car, saying I was ungrateful, that my parents had given me everything, and this was how I repaid them. I didn't respond, just got in the car and left. I drove back to the resort, feeling a mix of relief and guilt. I didn't know how to process. The next few days were crazy. My mom called me like 10 times a day, leaving dramatic voicemails about how I had destroyed the family. My dad sent me a text message saying I wasn't welcome in his house until I apologized to Kevin and resumed my financial responsibilities. Kevin blocked me on all social media, but not before making several vague posts like, "It's sad when people you thought loved you turn their back on you in the most difficult times," and "Some are only with you when it's convenient, but the truth always comes out." His friends commented supportive things, without really knowing what had happened, and I looked like the villain. A week later, something happened that made me realize how toxic my family really was. I was at work, in a normal meeting, when my boss called me into her office. She told me my mom had called the office, saying I was having a personal crisis and needed time off immediately. My boss was worried, asking me if everything was okay, if I needed help. I had to explain, super embarrassed, that no, I wasn't having any crisis, that I had just had a family conflict and my mom was being dramatic. It was humiliating to have to talk about my personal life with my boss like that. I called my mom furious, asking her how she dared to call my work, that she had no right to do that. She said she had done it because she was worried about me, that I clearly wasn't thinking clearly, and that maybe if I took some time off, we could work things out. I told her to never contact my work again, or there would be consequences. She started crying, saying I was talking to her horribly, that she just wanted to help. Kevin's posts on social media became more specific. He started posting things like, "When your own brother abandons you, knowing you have children to feed," with photos of Liam and Ava. His friends commented things like, "What a terrible brother," and "Your family is better off without toxic people." I didn't respond publicly, but sent him a private message telling him to stop using his kids to manipulate the narrative. He replied that he was just expressing his pain, and that if I felt attacked, it was because I knew what he was saying was true. About 2 weeks later, Kevin showed up at the resort. I don't know how he knew where I was. Probably my parents told him. He knocked on my room door, and when I opened it, there he was, with that angry face he used to make when we were kids and he didn't get his way. He told me we needed to talk like men. That's what he said. Like men. I let him in because I didn't want to make a scene in the hallway. He sat in the desk chair and unloaded everything on me. That I was selfish, that I had always been the perfect son who made everyone else look bad, that I enjoyed seeing him suffer, that I had never believed in his entrepreneurial dreams. I told him that was ridiculous, that I had supported him financially multiple times, but he said that money wasn't real support, that real support was believing in someone. I asked him what exactly he wanted from me. He told me to come back to the house, to pay my share like before, to help with groceries, and basically for everything to go back to the way it was. I told him that wasn't going to happen, that I had been subsidizing his life for too long and that he needed to find a way to support himself. He told me I didn't understand how hard it was to have kids, that everything was more expensive, that it wasn't as easy as I thought. I replied that having kids had been his decision, not mine, and that he couldn't expect me to pay for the consequences of his decisions. Kevin stood up and told me I was dead to him, that he had no brother, that when I needed something from him, not to count on anything. I told him that was fine, that I could live with that. He left slamming the door, and that was the last time I saw him in person. That night, I sent a text message to my parents, a simple one that said, "I'm not going to continue being part of this toxic dynamic. I wish you the best, but I need indefinite space. Don't contact me." And I blocked them. I blocked their numbers, blocked them on social media, blocked Kevin, Amanda, my grandmother, my uncles, everyone. It was the first time in my life I had done something so drastic, but I knew that if I didn't, they would keep trying to manipulate me into coming back. During the following weeks, my Facebook message inbox filled up with messages from family members I hadn't blocked. My cousin wrote me a long paragraph about the disappointment everyone felt. My aunt told me I had broken my mom's heart. A cousin I barely knew told me I was a disgrace to the family name. I didn't respond to any of them. I just left them on read or ignored them completely. About a month after all this drama, something happened that completely validated me. Kevin tried to screw with my job again. He called my office, pretending to be a former coworker of mine, saying he needed to talk to my boss about something important related to me. The receptionist put him through to my boss because Kevin sounded urgent and professional. Kevin told my boss that I had been harassing him, that I was sending him threatening messages, that he was worried about his safety and his family's safety. Basically tried to paint me as a psychopath. Fortunately, my boss is a smart woman who knows her job well. She asked Kevin to send her evidence of these supposed threatening messages. Kevin obviously had nothing because I hadn't sent him anything, so he started stammering excuses. My boss told him that if he was really worried about his safety, he should go to the police, not call someone's workplace, and that if he contacted the office again, she would consider taking legal action for harassment. Kevin hung up. My boss told me all this the next day. Not in an accusatory way, but rather concerned about me. I explained the whole family situation briefly, and she was very understanding. Even suggested I document everything in case I needed a restraining order in the future. The following months were quiet, relatively. I moved from the resort to a small but decent apartment, a place just for me where nobody bothered me. It was more expensive than what I paid at my parents' house, but it was worth every penny. I started going to the gym regularly, something I had stopped doing due to lack of time and energy. When I was living in the chaos of the family house, my work improved because I could concentrate without distractions. I started therapy because, honestly, I needed to process everything that had happened with someone neutral who wasn't on anyone's side. About 6 months after I left, I found out from a cousin, one of the few who hadn't blocked me, or that I had blocked, that Kevin and my parents had been evicted from the house. Apparently, my parents had stopped paying the mortgage because all their money was going into supporting Kevin, Amanda, and the kids. The bank foreclosed on the mortgage and kicked them out. My parents moved to a small apartment with Kevin and his family, basically everyone living in a tiny space. My cousin sent me photos. You don't know where he got them from. And it was ironic to see Kevin living in conditions similar to or worse than the hobby room they had put me in. But the strongest thing came like a month later. I found out that Amanda had left Kevin and taken the kids to live with her parents. Apparently, she had discovered that Kevin had been spending the little money they had on online sports betting, trying to make quick money instead of looking for a real job. Amanda finally had enough and left. Kevin was now living with my parents in that small apartment, unemployed, getting divorced, and according to my cousin, basically depressed all day. Part of me felt bad when I found out. I'm not going to lie. He's my brother. We grew up together. We played together when we were kids. But the other part of me, the part that had been exploited and manipulated for years, felt that this was a direct consequence of his own decisions. Nobody forced him to have kids so young. Nobody forced him to close businesses without having a plan B. Nobody forced him to spend money on unnecessary things when his family needed the basics. And my parents, who had always protected him from the consequences of his actions, We're finally seeing the result of having created a son who never learned to be responsible. My mom tried to contact me one more time like 2 months ago. She sent me a Facebook message that said, "Daniel, please, we need you." I didn't open the message completely, just saw it in the notification, and left it on read. My therapist has helped me understand that I don't have the obligation to rescue them, that for years I was the emotional and financial life preserver of that family, and that I have the right to live my own life. I still feel guilty sometimes, especially when I think about Liam and Ava. But I remind myself that they have 2 parents and 4 grandparents. It's not my responsibility to support them. Now I'm 26. I live alone in an apartment I can comfortably afford. My job is going very well. They even promoted me 2 months ago. I go to the gym 4 times a week. I hang out with friends. I have hobbies. I've started dating someone. Nothing serious yet, but it's nice to meet people without the constant weight of family drama. My therapist says I've made incredible progress in establishing healthy boundaries, and that I should be proud of having put myself first for once in my life. Do I regret anything? Honestly, I only regret not having done it sooner. I regret having let them treat me like an ATM for so long. I regret having normalized the favoritism so obvious toward Kevin. But I don't regret having left. I don't regret having blocked my family, and I definitely don't regret having chosen my peace of mind over the toxic dynamic that had been my life for years. I guess in the end I learned that family isn't just blood. Family is respect, reciprocity, and real love, not manipulation disguised as obligation.